Aloha and welcome to East-West Center Insights. I'm Susie Vareslum, president of the East-West Center, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's webinar where we will be joined by one of Japan's foremost experts on China, Dr. Akio Takahara. Dr. Takahara will share his valuable insights on recent developments in China and their implications for the Indo-Pacific region. But before we begin, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel at a later date. So you're welcome to share it with others who were not able to make it with us here today. But thank you all for being here. The East-West Center is honored to partner with the Consulate General of Japan in Honolulu for this special event. And we deeply appreciate the Consulate's long-standing collaboration and support of the center that was established in 1960. Now, it is my privilege to welcome the Consul General Yoshinori Kodama to share a few remarks. Over to you, Consul General.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Susie, and everybody in the East-West Center. Thank you very much. My name is Kodama, Consul General of Japan in Honolulu. First and foremost, I welcome wholeheartedly Professor Takahara. Thank you very much for your dedication just today. And also everybody, just the audience, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a great pleasure and honor, and especially here in Hawaii, very important place for geopolitically. And also this is a symbolic place for multicultural, multi-diversity. It's such a great honor to receive Professor Takahara. Professor Takahara is a distinguished visiting professor at the Tokyo Women's Christian University and a former professor of contemporary Chinese politics at the Graduate School of Law and Politics at the University of Tokyo. Professor Takahara received his DPhil, Doctor of Philosophy, in 1988 from Sussex University, England, and later spent several years as a visiting scholar at Harvard University, Peking University, and the Mercator Institute for China Studies, Berlin in Germany, and the Australian National University. And once Professor Takahara was the Dean of the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo from 2018 to 2020, and the Director of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, the JICA Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development from 2020 to 2023. Professor Takahara has been engaged in so many posts and so many positions in the think tanks in academic areas, and also advisor to the Japanese government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and others. Today, just I would like to share, it's such a great pleasure to share with the audience, students, experts, about the insights and expertise of Professor Takahara, especially just people like me, the practitioner, his sort of encouragement, and also just his insights. These are just, I can say, a beacon or the great encouragement for our work. Especially China is such a challenging, difficult subject, but everybody should take care of that. So especially in Hawaii, the center of the Pacific and the East-West Center as a bridge is such a great occasion for us to receive and share his insights and also his encouragement with us. So just I would like to just invite Professor Takahara for his just a lecture. So thank you very much. Just please, Professor Takahara, please take your time. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Consul General Kodama, and thank you very much. Also, I would like to thank the East-West Center very sincerely for this fantastic opportunity to exchange views with our colleagues in Hawaii and other places in the United States and beyond. I would like to start by sharing my slides. I think I have 20 to 30 minutes. So my big challenge is to finish speaking in half an hour's time. But the topic is, can we maintain peace with China? I'd like to talk about some developments inside China and what kind of implications they would have to us in the Indo-Pacific region. That's the topic of today. I'd like to start by sharing with you some observations about the Chinese domestic situation. That is, many people know about the economic downturn that they are facing. And there are signs of social instability, I'm afraid to say. The growth rate is coming down. The target for this year is around 5%, but they're having difficulties in meeting this growth rate target. And the Chinese Communist Party leaders have realized the difficulties, especially in the third quarter of this year, let's say, and in September, they have started to introduce some monetary and fiscal stimulus policies. But for a moment, it helped the stock market to pick up. But then we have noticed that, I'm afraid to say, they have had little impact on the consumption that they really need to boost. And what's happening in society is, you may have heard about the recurring knife attacks, cars ramming into crowds, and all these unusual things have been happening. And what concerns us even more is the fact that some of them are targeting foreigners, even Americans. The American professors were stabbed in Jilin province earlier in the year, and a Japanese schoolboy was stabbed to death outside the Japanese school in Shenzhen, an international school, international city, just on the northern side of Hong Kong. And more generally, there has been a lot of cases of wage arrears. Even in the local governments, the public civil servants don't get paid. So it's a very grave situation. You talk to any Chinese who will come to see you recently, they will all tell you about the economic difficulties that they're facing back home. Right. And how would this lead to diplomacy? Diplomacy is an extension of domestic politics, right? I'm afraid to say there is a temptation for the leaders of diversionary diplomacy to find some friction outside of the country to divert people's attention from their domestic woes to outside enemies, as it were. And Xi Jinping in recent years has been emphasizing national security. It seems as if he has national security even finding it more important than economic development. One typical case is the revision of the anti-espionage law, and some American and Japanese business people have been detained or formally arrested. And many of the business people now don't want to take their families to China, or they don't want to go to China because of the fear of being detained for reasons that are not very clear at all. And when we look into the cases of the Japanese children being attacked in China, we find that their so-called patriotic education is excessive, I would say. The Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has complete control over all the flows of information in China, including those that go through the social networking services. So they can control anything if they wanted to. However, some what we find excessive anti-Japanese clips on TikTok and other media have gone uncontrolled. And many of us find that that's one of the reasons why there has been very crazy rumors, such as, Japanese schools for breeding spies and things like that. So this has been combined with the social atmosphere now, that foreigners, if you look at foreigners, you have to suspect that they could be spies, and the economic situation is so bad. And that's the background we find that these social incidents have been happening. I talked to my Chinese friends, you should do something about the content of your patriotic education. But they shake their heads and say, no, the CCP finds Japan as a very convenient lightning rod, as it were, to divert people's attention from other social woes and take their anger on these foreign enemies. So what will happen if the economic downturn goes even further? And there are more incidents of social instability. As I said, for the leaders, there is this temptation, I think, of resorting to nationalistic measures, both inside and outside the country. So we need to be prepared for these things, especially, their defense capabilities. Getting better and better very rapidly. When compared to the Japanese defense budget, for example, now the Chinese defense budget is 5 to 6 times larger. I think you're aware of this. And then what about the intentions? Their capabilities are certainly going up. It's very interesting to look into the internal speeches of Xi Jinping. Some Japanese academics have got hold of the internal speeches by him. And this is a quote from his speech given to naval officers in May 2017. Now, Xi Jinping said that history indicates that a true world power is one that is both a sea power and land power. It is our important strategic decision to proceed to a nation that is both a sea power and a land power. That's what he says. So Xi Jinping's intention is to become a true world power. And the means to do so is to become not only a land power, but also a sea power. And of course, what stands in between that goal and the current situation is the existence of the United States. And he is also aware of the so-called first island chain. And it's very interesting. He went on to say in the speech that we are disadvantaged in the strategic geopolitical environment because we are half contained by the first island chain. So the route out to the outer ocean is seized by others. So when he said this, of course, what he had in mind was this map. I think you're familiar of this map. When looked from China into the Pacific Ocean, the world looks like this. So yes, it is true that China is as if half contained by the first island chain. So when I look at this map, it makes me think that what is the significance of Taiwan, for the CCP, of course, unifying with Taiwan is a nationalistic target. The Civil War hasn't really ended. In 1949, the KMT was defeated in mainland China. Chiang Kai-shek escaped to Taiwan. So it is the dream of the CCP to unify the nation and establish a true nation state. That's understandable. And of course, that is a target even today. But at the same time, China's external policy, the primary external policy target is now to win the strategic competition with the United States. And therefore, unifying with Taiwan has another significance, that is to secure a bridgehead, as it were, to secure a breakthrough point when China attempts to go out into the ocean, breaking the half containment of the first island chain. So there is this new significance, the strategic significance of unifying with Taiwan. And these intentions actually expand along with the increase in their national power. This happens perhaps not only in China, but in other countries too. But even in one person, the more powerful you become, your intentions become bigger. So I think some of you remember Xi Jinping telling President Obama that the Pacific is wide enough to accommodate both China and the United States. But he told President Biden last year in November when they met in San Francisco, that the globe is big enough for China and the US to coexist. So it's very clear that Xi Jinping's dreams are expanding. So countries' intentions will change along with power. And for China, that's been changing very quickly. But then the next question is, will China use force on Taiwan? Everyone's very concerned about this. So if I may jump to my conclusion as of today, I don't think that will happen in the near future. Why? Because unification with Taiwan is not Xi Jinping's top priority. His top priority is maintaining the regime, maintaining his power. So if that's the top priority target, now the risk of attacking Taiwan is so big. If anything, if any hostilities break out around Taiwan, all the economies around Taiwan finished, right? Not only the Taiwanese economy, Chinese economy, but also the Japanese, the Koreans, because we rely on the sea lines of communications around Taiwan. And if that stops, we are doomed. And that will cause a huge tsunami all around the global economy. The Europeans, even the Europeans have understood this. They have started to send a lot of their naval vessels to East Asia because they want to prevent any hostilities breaking out in this region, because they understand that their security, in the large sense of the term, is very much related to the peace and security in this part of the world. And for Xi Jinping, that will mean that people will go against that decision and the decision by the Chinese Communist Party. So now, for now, what's better for Xi Jinping is to win without fighting. This is the Sun Tzu art of war. The best way to win over your opponent is to win without fighting. So other measures, through economic measures, through cultural measures, through infiltration, manipulation of information, what have you. They've been doing this towards Taiwan for many, many years, but they will intensify that effort. That's for sure. So we should be prepared for that. And as far as the military acts are concerned, the salami slicing tactic has been adopted. So they are extending their areas of military drills. This is the latest drill they had in October. I think you're familiar about that. The salami slicing happens in other parts of East Asia too, in the South China Sea. You know about the frictions with the Philippines, the Filipinos, and with Japan. They are every day increasing, notching up their pressure, physical pressure that they give to the Japanese around the Senkaku Islands, what the Chinese call Diaoyu. So, all the neighbors, the maritime neighbors, feeling this physical pressure coming from China every day. So therefore, of course, we would like the United States, of course, to stay, and we would like to reinforce our cooperation with the United States on this front. But on the other hand, what's giving us a big headache, I'm afraid to say, is what are we going to do about economic security with China? I think the Americans are leading this front and started to sever supply chains of dual-use technology, especially around chips and so on. So how are we going to deal with this new situation? Because we benefit a lot, on the other hand, from our economic dealings with China. And there is this other aspect of cooperation. We compete fiercely with the Chinese on the one side, but on the other side, we do cooperate a lot. And the degree of dependence on the Chinese economy is not something that can be ignored. That's the dilemma. That's the reality that we are in. And it's the same from the Chinese side. The Chinese also has a dilemma of competing and cooperating at the same time. Now, this is a graph to show the amount of trade that we do with China. it was in 2004 that the amount of trade with China exceeded that with the United States. Now, last year, China trade came down, US trade went up, so the gap is smaller than what's shown here. But anyhow, still, the China is by far the largest trading partner for Japan. And this is very interesting. This is a result of the public survey conducted every year by the Japanese Genron NPO and its counterpart in China. And it shows that if you see the top red line, that's the percentage of the Japanese people who do not have a good image of China. And last year, with the nuclear power plant, treated water issue, China banning all the import of aqua products from Japan and other factors combined, 92.2% of the Japanese did not have a good image of China. The percentage is so high. And perhaps this year it will go up even further. The results for this year hasn't been published yet, but with the stabbing incidents and so on, there's a likelihood that the percentage of the Japanese not having good image of China could even go up further. But if you look at the green line, the second one from the bottom, this shows the percentage of the Chinese people who have a good image of Japan. And after the big clash over the Senkakus in 2012, the following year, only 5.2% of the Chinese had a good image of Japan. But after that, the percentage went up. In 2019, it reached almost 46%. So we were expecting that perhaps in the following year, it could go beyond the 50% line, but that didn't happen. There was a bit of a decline the following year. In 2021, 13 points decline, and it started to pick up again. Yeah, how can we explain this? We find that the increase and the decrease goes along with, matches the pace of increase of the Chinese tourists visiting Japan. So you can see the quick increase from 2014 upwards. And it depends on how you draw these graphs, but the pace of growth sort of coincides with the pace of growth of this green line that you saw here. But in 2020, there was a big drop. And of course, this is because of COVID, right? And in 2021, hardly anybody came. And that, I think, would explain a big part of these lines here on the green line. But after people started to come back, now it's picking up again, yeah, the percentage of the Chinese with a good image of Japan. And in 2024, this year, there's been a huge increase again in the number of Chinese tourists coming. It's not reflected here, but that's the case. It's going to be, I think, around this much. Yeah, and perhaps the image will improve. And this shows that once the Chinese come to Japan, they realize that the Japan they had learned about back home is different from the real Japan that they see and feel and smell if they come to Japan in person. So it really makes us realize the impact of patriotic education, which provides a very negative image of Japan with the Chinese people. And this perception gap, therefore, I would say very much of it arises from a big information gap. And here I'm showing you one typical example how information gaps happen. If you remember, in 2010, there was a trawler collision incident in which Chinese fishing trawler and two Japanese Coast Guard vessels collided. And one day after the collision happened, you see this picture here, I think drawn by some artist that Xinhua News Agency hired. Xinhua News Agency dispatched this picture telling the Chinese people that this is what happened. You can see that two Japanese big patrol vessels of the Coast Guards ramming into the belly of a small fishing trawler. So this is the version of the incident that the Chinese people got. But of course, we know that that's not what happened. In reality, the Japanese version is this. And if you see this video, you can easily find that it was actually the fishing trawler that rammed into the backside of two Japanese Coast Guard vessels. So these things happen. So information gap is a very big problem. So how can we narrow this information gap and the perception gap is the one big challenge that we are facing today. And, all in all, what we have had to adopt is a two-pronged approach. That's the way I call it. Competing with China fiercely on the one hand, but cooperating with China very much on the other hand. And this is the dilemma that we are in. Many countries are in this dilemma. It's very contradictory because if you are competing, you should not cooperate with the other side, really, because cooperation makes the other side much stronger. So then should we stop? But if we didn't cooperate, can we maintain our basis of competition? Our economies are too much dependent on China's. So without cooperating with China, what are we going to do with the Japanese economy? And if the Japanese economy stagnates, can we compete with China? I don't really think so. So then which side is right? Both sides are right. So this is the dilemma. And in this kind of a situation, we have to mobilize every means to maintain peace. I'm not an IR expert. I'm a more of an area studies guy. So I think balance of power is important. So the Japanese and our allies should increase our defense budget. But I think mutual interdependence is also important. It helps. Only by interdependence we cannot maintain peace, but it helps. So we should cooperate with China even further. And constructivism says that peace can be maintained by sharing norms and values. I think that's very important too. The basic value, basic norm, of course, is peace. So we have to keep on conversing with our Chinese colleagues and emphasizing the importance of this basic norm, that is peace. Okay, but the basic challenge we all face is we have to have the resilience and wisdom to live with this contradiction, to live through this contradiction. But it's going to be increasingly difficult to strike a balance because we know that the competition is going to intensify. And on the other hand, cooperation, I think, will be widened and deepened. So our nations will be divided over our approach to China. And therefore, we would need a lot of domestic coordination of views and interests. And the top leader, has to have a very broad power base to go the middle way. He or she has to have the ability to persuade both the hawks and the doves and go the middle way. But it's going to be increasingly tough for all the countries. So I call this the strategic patience. Then the next question will be, for how long must we continue with the strategic patience that I just tried to describe to you? So my answer is until China changes and stops changing the status quo by physical force. The Chinese at the moment, they are fixated with this paradigm of Fu Min Qiang, or in Japanese, we used to have a similar slogan, Fukoku Kyohei, that is to strengthen the military and enrich the nation. Many countries in the midst of modernization have such kind of slogans, but the Chinese should get rid of that, overcome that, and enter a postmodern era, as it were, where all different norms and values are treasured. And I hope that one day they can embrace this value of small is beautiful and multiculturalism. It takes a long time, I know, it will take a very long time for China. But I can find some seeds for change. If there are any questions about it, I can tell you some examples. But anyhow, we cannot shape China, however, from outside. Only the Chinese can change China. So what we can do is to help the Chinese change. Even without our help, the Chinese are changing. Xi Jinping knows that, so he's desperate to indoctrinate his people through propaganda and so on. So it's a race, it's a competition, as it were. But first of all, we have to try and narrow the perception gap through narrowing the information gap. So with that, I would like to close my initial remarks. I'm very happy to have this occasion to listen to your criticisms and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Takahara. We now have an opportunity to take questions from our online audience. If you want to ask a question, find the question and answer function at the bottom of your screen. It'll open a dialog box. Type your question in there and we'll see it. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible in our allotted time. First question from Richard Rothschiller. Given the importance that both the US and Japanese government attach to the US military presence on Okinawa and the controversy about those American forces being stationed there among the local people, how sustainable is that situation?
Thank you. You know, when a person called Mr. Nakaima used to be the governor of Okinawa, I think over 10 years ago, I used to be a volunteer advisor to the Okinawan government. Mr. Nakaima, Governor Nakaima, towards the end of his term, he established a new division in his government entitled Local Security Policy Division. His idea was to think about security issues by the Okinawans themselves, you know, not leave everything to Tokyo, but Okinawa should have its own ideas about security. And in that division, we together conducted public surveys of the Okinawan people for 3 years in a row. You can still see some of the results. I think for a couple of years, survey results are still on the website of the Okinawan government. So if you check those, you'll find that the Okinawan people, of course, don't like the existence of so many bases in Okinawa, but at the same time, they love the United States. So that's the situation. By the way, as far as their views on China is concerned, they have a more negative view than the national average of the Japanese people. That's very understandable because, you know, the Senkakus actually are in Okinawa, and the Chinese are physically exerting pressure on the Okinawan people. But anyhow, so I think it's not the question of they hate the Americans or they hate America, but it's the concrete incidents that happen around the bases. So if we can come up with ways to control, contain, and limit the number of cases of these incidents, I think the basic existence of the Americans in Okinawa in itself is not a problem.
Next question from Ed Hawkins. Some people think Xi Jinping wants to achieve unification with Taiwan as part of his historic legacy, very much as Putin wants to reincorporate, quote, historic, unquote, Russian lands, those now being contested in Ukraine as his historic legacy. That may mean an aggressive war against Taiwan may be inevitable in Xi's tenure. What do you think?
Yes, I think there is a possibility. He hasn't said it very clearly, but if Xi Jinping wants to leave a legacy, unifying with Taiwan is a very good target, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's really in his mind. But at the same time, if that is going to lead to big turmoil in China and losing power, destroying the CCP regime, and then that's going to be a terrible legacy. So I think he is still cool-headed, and he can make the judgment in a very objective and not so emotional way. So from his point of view, perhaps the invasion of Ukraine by Putin doesn't look like a very rational decision made by the leader of Russia.
Next question from Michael Brandt. Does China have any legitimate reason to feel threatened by the West?
Xi Jinping is especially afraid of the color revolution. Yes, he talks often about the possibility of a color revolution, meaning the Chinese Communist Party regime will be toppled by public movement, by the public, the Chinese public. And he always suspects that whenever those movements take place, the Americans are behind it. So that's his concern, big concern. But is there any legitimate reason for that? I think there's, what's the word? An excessive concern. One example is in 2009, when there was a huge incident in Urumqi in Xinjiang province. First, the Han people were attacked by the Uyghur Muslims, and then the following days, Han people attacked the Uyghur people, and many people were killed. And I asked one director of one institute of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, at the end of the day, what was the real reason for these incidents to happen? And he answered me immediately, "Oh, it's the working of the United States." So I was surprised to hear that. Do you have any evidence about that? And he said, well, such a document is going around the party internally. So I think there is this excessive fear because the Chinese Communist Party knows that they do not have the legitimacy to rule. Unlike our governments, they are not elected by the people. So they have to prove themselves to the public every day that they are worth being in power. So in that kind of a mindset, I think this ghost of the Americans coming to topple their government is always exaggerated. That's the mindset, I'm afraid, of the Chinese leaders today.
Question from Peshan Gunaratni. Nuclear deterrence will play an important role in discouraging any aggressor from attacking Japan. Will Japan scrap its anti-nuclear stance and develop nuclear weapons or procure them?
I don't think so, not in the near future at least. I think we have a very good understanding of nuclear weapons in all sorts of ways. Our determination not to go nuclear is a very solid one. And we know that if Japan went nuclear, what will happen to the NPT is, of course, gone. The Non-Proliferation Treaty system will be thrown into the rubbish bin. And the world will become a very, very dangerous place. And the Japanese, from that point of view too, will not pull this trigger, as it were. I think it's very important for the peace and stability of the world as a whole that Japan will not go nuclear.
Question from Nancy Nanny. Might China ever become a democracy?
In the very distant future, perhaps, but yes, that's my belief. And do you know why? Because the Chinese people, first of all, the Chinese people know that the current regime is not going to last forever. So they are waiting for this change. They don't know when the change will start, when the transformation will begin, what the transformation process is going to be, and what the end product of that transportation is going to be like. But they know that this regime is not going to last forever. It's like the earthquake to the Japanese people. We know that a huge earthquake is going to come and hit Tokyo and Osaka and those big cities. We don't know when it's coming. So usually we try not to think about it, but we know that one day that will come. And for the Chinese, you ask them, do you want democracy? No. And ordinary people do not understand what democracy is. You know, if you have never lived in a democracy, you don't quite understand what it is. But what they know what they want. What they want is rule of law, because they hate the abuse of power by the Chinese Communist Party people. So eventually, I think they would realize that in order to realize rule of law or democracy, political participation is going to be necessary. And for rule of law, at the basis of that has to come the prevalence of the idea of basic human rights. But it will take a long time before Chinese society reaches that point. But that's the direction in which they will develop.
Question from Tom Fisher. Are there efforts by the Chinese government to improve the image of China in Japan, or vice versa, efforts by the Japanese government to improve Japan's image in China? And how successful are these efforts by either country?
Well, yes, public diplomacy is implemented on both sides. For example, the Chinese government has been publishing very beautiful magazines, you know, very pretty, things like that. But there is a wolf warrior, diplomat that could very much disrupt these efforts from the other side, you know, neutralizing these efforts on by certain people to improve their image. The Japanese side, of course, with the function of the Japan Foundation, we try a lot to improve the image of Japan. But I think what's most effective is not the government policies, I'm afraid to say, but private activities like Japanese animation, Japanese manga, or Chinese video games, Chinese TV dramas. Those are the things that will improve the image of each side and more effective.
Question from Ayush Sharma. Most of the wars are initiated by authoritarian leaders when they're facing domestic difficulties. Now, this links back to a point you made earlier in your presentation about a war of distraction becoming perhaps more likely by China, given the domestic difficulties China is facing now. Could you speak a little more about this?
Well, I think even in democracies, there's always a temptation, maybe not a major war, you know, but to find some external frictions. But as you say, I think if we look back history, there are more cases of authoritarian governments resorting to those measures. But if China is to resort to such diversionary external policies, I don't think the chosen targets will be places like Taiwan or Japan, for that matter. Why? Because the United States is behind them. You know, so they should choose some easier targets, as it were. You know, places like perhaps India or Vietnam. And I think the Indians and the Vietnamese are well aware of this situation. So they are always very alert against the Chinese.
Question from Golnar Aziz. Thank you for your excellent presentation. You said it will take a long time to make peace with China. We need to collaborate with China for a long term. But how about in the meantime, people inside China who are facing genocide? It's a similar dilemma we face with a country like, say, North Korea, that it's difficult for us to have any kind of immediate positive impact on the people who are suffering there. How do we wrestle with this dilemma?
Under the current nation-state system, it's very difficult to intervene in the internal affairs of other countries. But we can certainly exert pressure from outside, not only by the governments, but from the civil societies. So I think what's important is to be concerned about these things happening in other countries. And if the government cannot do this or that, I think there's a lot that the civil society can do.
Question from Arnal Brazo Ibanez. In recent years, China has experienced contradictory societal moments like strong national online discourses or the white paper movement. How can we know the majoritarian opinions and views of the Chinese people if they can be expressed with such different ideologies?
It's very hard to learn what the Chinese people really have in their minds under the current political conditions. It's not easy to conduct public surveys, so the Genron NPO public survey is very precious. If you haven't seen the results, you should go to their website, Genron NPO, GENRON NPO. They have English pages too. So that's a very rare case in which we can find results of the public surveys. So I think in order to try and understand what views there are in the Chinese society, I think we just have to talk to as many Chinese people as possible. So that would lead to the narrowing of the information gap, the perception gap too. So how are we going to do it? You know, the Chinese government has been detaining, arresting, as I said, more foreigners. It's more difficult for us to go. So we want more Chinese to come over to our countries and listen to them and let them understand what we think. What we think is one. Why we think that way is another. And we would like to learn what the Chinese people are thinking and why they are thinking in that way. What are the basis of their judgment? That is very important for the real mutual understanding between us and them.
Question from Min Dok Huang. How would Japan feel about a peaceful unification between China and Taiwan?
Well, if it's going to be a peaceful unification, then what can we say? You know, and what kind of a China, what kind of a Taiwan will that be when that happens? I don't think the Taiwanese side will agree to for a peaceful unification if China remains a one-party rule, a one-party dominating system. So I would assume that if a peaceful unification is done, then the political transformation in China would have happened. So in which case we won't have any opposition against peaceful unification.
Question from Svetlana Vasiliuk. In your view, what is China's strategy behind recently increased incursions into Japan's air and maritime space?
Yes, thank you. So the Chinese side, as I said, is following the salami slicing strategy, as it were. So gradually, they are increasing the level of pressure. And the recent incident is an indication of that.
Okay, we have one more question from Luo Shuxian. Thanks for your excellent presentation. American scholars such as Victor Cha have proposed an Article 5 for collective economic actions that the US and allies should adopt to more effectively cope with Chinese economic coercion. Does this sound like a feasible operation for Japan?
I think we need to look into concrete cases. So, you know, generally speaking, we should cooperate and do things together to make the measure more effective. That's true. But whether we can agree on the specific issue or not, I think we have to look into them one by one.
Guess we have time for one more from Roger Lucas. China's salami slicing, which you referred to, in the maritime setting continues to violate the international law of the sea that China has signed. How can this very risky behavior best be discouraged by the regional and international communities, including the government of Japan?
I think we need to point out this huge gap between what the Chinese say and what the Chinese do. You know, they keep on saying that they abide by international law, which they don't. They keep on saying they love peace and, you know, they will take friendly measures to solve international conflicts, which they don't do. So one problem, basic problem is the Chinese political system. If there is a gap, such a big gap between what they do and what they say in a democracy, immediately they'll be criticized by oppositions, by the media, by their own people. That doesn't happen in China, but we need to point it out loudly so that even the Chinese people themselves will hear, even under the controlled flow of information in China. So we have to get together and actually keep on telling the Chinese side that there is a gap and we are aware of it, and it's a problem for not only for us, but for the Chinese people.
We've reached the end of our allotted time. I want to thank you, Professor Takahara, for your excellent presentation and also for answering questions. Thank you also to our online audience for listening and asking questions. Thanks to the staff at the East West Center and the Japan Consulate in Honolulu for helping to make this presentation possible. Please join us for future programming. We have a great lineup of events this month at the East West Center. To see what's coming up next, visit our website at eastwestcenter.org/events. We hope